Right, this is Nick Krauser. Hello and welcome to another Womanizers Bible podcast. Alright then, the theme for today is going to be another excessively intellectual mind-wank topic. We're going to talk about how to degamify yourself. Yes, I actually said those words, degamify, yes. Right then, well, we'd best talk a little bit about what is gamma and why do you want to degamify. So, the male sexual hierarchy, as I use the terms, this is heavily influenced by Heartiste and by Vox Day. So that's Shadow Heartiste and Alpha Game Plan, both pretty good blogs. So anyway, those guys pretty well fleshed out the male sexual hierarchy. So I'll just briefly outline it here. So you got at the top, you got the alpha males. Those are the guys who are characterized by social dominance and by a very strong internal reality and ability to push their frame out and tell people how things are, and everybody else falls into line. Below that, you have the beta males, which in Royce's stroke Hortis terms, they are the drones, the followers, the worker bees. They are characterized by conflict avoidance, by being team players. Now, Vox calls these guys Delta, and he uses the word beta to describe a category which is between the two, which are the lieutenants of the Alpha. Essentially, the hangers-on, the entourage, the trusted lieutenants of the Alpha guy. So these guys, they need the leader. They don't have a particularly strong reality, but they do have a very high social value, and thus they do get access to lots of hot girls. But that's a little complex, so I'm just going to use beta in the Royce stroke Horty sense of the word. Vox's version of betas, I think it's quite useful, but yeah, I think you can just wrap those up as basically calling them junior alphas. Right then, so the betas are the vast majority of the population, or what Vox would call the deltas. And then at the very bottom you have the the Amigas, who are the losers. You know, the stereotype there would be the World of Warcraft players, the ones who live in their mum's basement. They wear like the furry costumes or bronies and weird like neck beards and so on. So anyway, that's the Amigas, and they are characterized by invisibility. They basically just don't take part in society. They're not invited to the party, they just keep quiet and they busy themselves with their asocial hobbies and online communities. Now, those are the three major categories. And I think if you were to put a rough estimate on it, I think 1, maybe 2% of men could come into the alpha category. Maybe 10 to 20% you could call Amiga. I think this category is rising. And then everybody else, you're talking about whatever, 80% of the population, that's beta males. Now, there's no morality in this, right? We're not saying alphas are better people than betas who are better than Amigas. If anything, I guess you could say the betas are actually the salt of the earth, stand-up guys, team players, nation builders, and alphas can actually be quite annoying. But I'm not here to talk about virtue. We're talking just about describing it as it relates to sex and women. Now, things get a bit more complex when you add in a couple of intermediate categories. So Royce famously invented the category herb, which comes from the translation of a Japanese word, which means grass-eating men. So basically, there's a whole category of men in Japan, which had been noticed about 10 years ago, who have sworn off women. They're very low testosterone. They literally don't eat meat. And if you think of like those faggoty Korean and Japanese boy bands with the asymmetrical haircuts and really like no upper body strength, that's basically what we're talking about. We're talking about herbs. So I do recommend you check the old Heartiste archive, somewhere around 2010, 2011, if you want to have a laugh with a lot of very funny posts about herbs. So there's those guys. And then there's also two categories which, so far as I know, were invented by Vox Day, and I think they're very, very important for the pickup community, which is Sigma and Gamma. So, first, the sigma male. The sigma male is outside the hierarchy. All the other guys, the alpha, the beta, the omega, and the herb, what they have in common is there's some kind of relation of dominance. The analogy here would be if you think of sociology and different concepts of the class structure and social stratification. You'd have what you call the Registrar General scale, which is the one used in government statistics in England, or at least it certainly was when I did sociology. And what that is occupational based categories, right? Like, I forget the detail because we're going back like 20 years, but it's things like if you're a doctor, you are in, I don't know, class C1 or something, right? You're the upper middle class. If you're a lawyer, that's where you are. If you're a landowner or business owner, you're in the elite class. If you're a teacher, maybe in category C2 or something, below the doctors and lawyers. If you're a manual labourer, you're a lower class again. If you Google Registrar General Scale Social Stratification, you'll see what I mean. But what's not very important is what are the categories. What's important is the relationship between the categories, i.e. there isn't one. You just are your occupation, that's your social class, and your social class doesn't really have any connection to any other social class. Contrast this to, say, the Marxist view of social class, which I, by the way, don't like. But one thing he did get right is that social class is actually relational, meaning that you define your social class not just by who you are, but by how you act with the other social classes. So under the very simple original Marxist formulation, you have the bourgeoisie, which is the elite, the landed aristocrats, the business owners. Then you have the proletariat, which is the working mass. And then I guess you could also say you have the petty bourgeoisie, i.e. the emergent middle class, who are like the shop owners. So what happens under the Marxist typology is that the rich are rich, the bourgeoisie are in a privileged position precisely because they fuck over the proletariat, and the proletariat are poor precisely because they're fucked over by the bourgeoisie. Right, and that's where the whole idea of injustice comes from, and action, and it motivates, the complete destruction of the world over the last 100 years. But from a sociological point of view, he's actually quite right, is that the social classes are related to each other, and you can't have a bourgeoisie without a proletariat, and vice versa. So that is essentially what the alpha, beta, omega thing is each category is not just got its own characteristics, but they are defined in relationship to the others. You can't have alphas without betas following them. You can't have omegas without having a large class of betas whom are excluding them. Right? And betas are directionless without having alphas to lead them. So what everyone inside the hierarchy has in common is there's some type of interdependence. I mean, there's winners and losers within that, but there's interdependence. Right. Where sigmas differ is they are outside the hierarchy. So a sigma is characterized by fierce independence. And I always like to use the examples from Hollywood movies of the likes of a Wolverine who's not really in the X-Men. He wants to just be in a cabin in the woods, mind his own business, drinking whiskey and chopping wood. There's a Han Solo character who doesn't really want to be involved in the battle between the dark side and the light side of the Force and the Jedi. He just wants to do his gun running and smuggling in his Millennium Falcon. There's the Clint Eastwood cowboy character, the man with no name, who's just him and his horse wandering from town to town, selling his gun as a mercenary and figuring out how to steal the gold and the women. So it's independence, right? He is not following the alphas and he's not leading the betas. So I think Vox has written a lot of really, really good stuff about the sigma because he is a sigma male. And I like the sigma category because I'm a sigma male. So the thing about the sigma is you can have high functioning and low functioning sigma. So basically the high functioning sigma would be the Han Solo, the Clint Eastwood. A low functioning sigma would just be, I don't know, some kind of iconoclastic musician in a loft conversion in a grotty part of town who just does his own thing, makes fuck all money, and every now and then shags a decent bird. So it's not a low function sigma isn't anything particular to aspire to, but a high function sigma is, because they can immediately slot into society anytime they want at the same level as an alpha. and there's a sort of grudging respect between the sigmas and the alphas. But crucially, the sigmas are attractive to women, high functioning sigmas, because of this independence and the being outside the rules. So I think, as most of you listening to this know, there's something inherently sigma about day game. It's very solo, it's very introverted, it's very inwardly motivated, and it doesn't require basically being any part of an existing hierarchy. In fact, it's quite the opposite. You're basically being Clint Eastwood as the cowboy, rolling up into a town, certainly for you, a jaunt, and then trying to pick off the women. So that's sigma. Now gamma, which is the focus of this talk, is also outside the hierarchy, but in a very negative way. So a gamma male, and again credit to Vox Day for coming up with this concept and fleshing it out very well. A gamma male is basically a twat, a total twat. Like the gamma male is a lower beta usually, or omega male, who simply does not accept his place in the hierarchy. He wishes to socially climb. In his own mind he's alpha, in his own mind he's hot shit, he's got a unique specialness. It's just that nobody seems to realise it, which makes him very angry. So I think gammas probably occupy quite an important part of society, if you think of it in terms of functionalism, that everybody has their place for a reason, everybody's serving a purpose. Now what gammas do is they introduce instability into male bonding networks, right? So betas, if Vox uses the example of Band of Brothers, is a fantastic show for explaining beta mentality of everyone in this squad going off to war, pulling together, fighting together, helping each other out. The gamma is always the guy in there, like the spanner in the works, being the twat, right? So when you have the zombie movie where they're all holed up in the shopping mall, and the zombies are outside, they've barricaded it, they've got their tinned foods and ammunition and water supply, everything looks like it's going to go okay. In those movies there's always like one twat, it's always like an unattractive guy who starts fucking with things, like trying to sneak his way into a girl's pants, trying to tear down the alpha because of spite, and then normally he ends up being a gate raising traitor, somehow lets the zombies in and everything goes to shit. Right, so that's like the gamma male. There's loads and loads of movies and books where what you find is there's a Conan the Barbarian style alpha who's going out getting shit done, and then there's some Weasley little magician or perfumed politician type sort of worm tongue character who's trying to tear him down using underhand tactics, right? That's basically the gamma. Now what gammas all have in common is they don't accept their position in the hierarchy, right? A beta will just do what he's told, he'll pull for the team. A gamma won't, right? A gamma is absolutely determined to climb. But unlike a sigma, who just goes and does his own thing, the gamma climbs by trying to tear other people down. And that's why gammas you often see on the internet as haters. Right? I think, again, this is just numbers I'm pulling out my arse, but I'd guess 80 to 90% of internet haters are gammas, because rather than accentuate their strengths to climb up, they rely on trying to tear other people down. So gammas will also frequently become Marxists. So my conception of gamma differs slightly from Vox's, and he likes to paint them as basically feminized omegas, as they're like fat neckbeards with no friends, whereas I think a lot of gammas can actually be quite high functioning. I think you see a lot of them in martial arts, especially in martial arts that don't require combat. So you see them in dim mak and ninjutsu and karate, and the reason for this is the gamma's strategy fundamentally is to climb not through having value and having people choose to follow, but to have a secret system, to have an in, to have some kind of weaselly thing that and other people don't, that provides you with advantage. So if you think of like death touch martial arts, that would be a classic example, right? It's the gamma knows he's not tough enough or courageous enough or athletic enough to be like, say, an alpha fighter, and he's doesn't accept his position in the hierarchy, like his role as a helper like a beta would. So he's got to sort his ego out to be tough in another way. So what he does is he figures out a secret system, right? So you can probably see why pickup attracts an unusually disproportionate amount of gammas. Because pickup seduction is often marketed like it's a secret underground skill. You know, it's a way to get the hot girls without really deserving them, and that is like catnip to gammas. So gammas will often be excessively mental masturbatory when it comes to pickup, but importantly not actually do a lot of opening. And this is because the kryptonite to gammas is reality. So let's look at that in a bit more detail. Right, so the core psychology of a gamma male is that he doesn't accept that he's quite low down in the hierarchy. And he thinks he's the king, he thinks he's an alpha, but reality clearly disagrees with him. He's not getting laid, he doesn't have hot girlfriends, he's not popular, he's a twat. So what he has to do is he has to create a delusionary bubble to feed the ego, right? A false idealized self where he is actually the king. Now the problem with that gamma delusion bubble is, of course, it's very easily pricked by reality. So gammas are incredibly dishonest and incredibly reality avoiding, in particular conflict avoiding. So, I mean, I used to be pretty gamma back in the day. I still have certain traces of it, and I'll give you an example of that. I used to do Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu. I wasn't particularly good at it, but I did do it for a couple of years, kind of semi-serious. And I did learn it, right? So why did Jiu-Jitsu appeal to me? Well, this was in about 1997, when the UFC was only a couple of years old. It still was pretty much unknown in the UK. It was a secret system, right? It was a secret system for how to be tough. Right? I watched Royce Gracie defeat the ninjas, defeat the big guys, and he was just a little dude himself. So I thought, look, this is the secret system, right? So that immediately appeals to my gamma social climbing mindset. So I did Jiu-Jitsu. Now, unlike Taekwondo and Karate and Dimak and Ninjutsu and stuff, oh yeah, and I did do Ninjutsu as well, like earlier, is Jiu-Jitsu actually has rolling, it has sparring, right? It has active competition where you find your value and you find out where your skills really are at. Now that is an actually anti-gamma thing, as we'll get to. It's a really good thing for gammas to use if they want to stop being gamma. Now, Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu does force you to deal with some element of reality on a regular basis, normally literally every class. So that was my proto-sigma sort of gamma breaking mind coming through, is I wasn't happy being gamma. I did actually want to be tougher. I didn't just want to have a bit of paper that said I was tough and a coloured belt. I actually wanted to be tough. So there was a certain internal, there was a cognitive dissonance there between my proto-sigma character, which is seek competition, try to dominate, do my own thing, and deal with reality, and then the gamma bit, which was a little bit uncomfortable that maybe too much reality will make me feel bad about low value. So what was my actual solution in Jiu-Jitsu? Well, I do all the training, where you're practicing the moves, right? There's no risk of reality there. But when it came to sparring, I was absolutely adamant not to be tapped out, to the point where I would just lock up a closed guard and hang on for 20 minutes if necessary, if the guy was considerably better than me, and just let the clock run out. Now, that is twatish behaviour, right? And some of the higher grades thought I was a bit of a twat. Now, I'm sure a lot of them used to be gammas themselves, so they understood why, but, what sort of idiot just uses a sparring session where he's supposed to train to get better with each other and cooperate with each other, which is what beta males do, and just uses that to basically be an anti-fighter, to just lock someone up so nobody learns and just gets pissed off, and then you walk away with that little bit of ego thinking, well, I didn't get tapped. It's just stupid, right? But that is a gamma mindset. So even in a martial art which has large elements of reality like Jiu-Jitsu, you get gammas. And I think now, as Jiu-Jitsu over the last 10 years has completely disappeared up its own arse, I think it's become extremely gamma now, with all, the weird technical advancements. So one thing Vox points out very well is that gammas don't do sport. Not like real sport, like real competitive sport. They don't fight, they don't cold approach. They basically avoid anything which can give realistic feedback on their value, because that would pop the delusion bubble, force them to confront their own low self-esteem, and then they'd have a meltdown. So that obviously tells you exactly what the main thing a gamma should do if they wish to stop being a gamma. So let's talk a little bit about what to do if you self-identify as a gamma. Well, I think after that description I gave you, you probably already know if you're gamma or not. You already know if you're rather precious about your own innate specialness that nobody else seems to recognise. So what can you do? Well, it's all about where do you want to go, right? Do you want to go from gamma to beta? Do you want to go from gamma to sigma? Do you want to go from gamma to alpha? Now, if your ideas go from gamma to alpha, I'd just say give up, not going to happen. But the other two paths are doable. They're difficult, but they're doable. So to go from gamma to beta, so you basically go from being an annoying little twat who always sabotages and backstabs and whines and is snarky and so on, to becoming a salt of the earth team player. Well, I don't know a great deal about that because that's not the path I took, but if you go on Vox's blog, Alpha Game Plan, I think .wordpress.com, he's got a whole series written by a guy called Delta Man, which is all about precisely that. It's about how do you go from gamma to delta, and it's pretty much what you'd expect. It's like, take a bit of care of your appearance, go to the gym, go out, talk to people, don't be a twat, engage in competitive sports, take on some responsibility, like let's say at like your local club or at work. So that's all well and good. So that's not very sexually useful, because what it'll basically do is it'll take you from a guy who is absolutely pussy repellent to a guy who gets a mediocre girlfriend and gets married. And I suppose if you don't have a great deal of potential, like your upper ceiling of SMV is not very high, that's probably a good path. If, however, your upper potential of SMV is actually quite high, it's just you're not using it because you're hamstringing yourself by being a twat, or by not putting the effort in, then gamma to sigma is certainly doable. So let's talk about that. What would be the things to do? Right. The fundamental problem of a gamma is the delusion bubble, right? It's a constant avoidance and reframing of reality. This constant attempt to find a secret in. And what is the primary strength of a gamma? Well, he's absolutely determined to be higher up. He's got that real drive that he thinks he's special and he thinks he deserves better. Well, that's actually quite useful when it comes to game. So that bit of gamma you want to keep, right? So whereas Vox and Delta Man suggest that you suppress this feeling of uniqueness and specialness to become more of a team player, that's if you want to be gamma, you actually have to keep that. Right? Don't actually hurt that. So a strategy I think is probably quite useful is you basically have to manage the problem of your low SMV or your underutilized SMV, your lack of game, your being a twat, and your ego, and you have to find the right balance to move up. So what I would actually suggest you do is this. You do the things which will raise your SMV and your game, but you don't try too hard to confront your ego. What I mean by this is, don't worry too much about your gamma delusion bubble, about your reframing reality to make yourself also special, so long as you know in your heart of hearts you're taking right action. Right, what does that mean? Well, if I was with a beta guy and I was advising him, I'd say, look, just do cold approach, look reality square in the face, accept the feedback you're getting, accept what that tells you about yourself, drop your ego, and then make the changes, right? Because beta guys, I think, are quite good at that because they don't have pretensions about being alpha. It doesn't sting so hard when they find their true value because they kind of know their role anyway. Right, there's a certain easygoingness and calmness about betas which make them quite pleasant to be around. A gamma, however, if he gets unpleasant feedback from reality, he denies it, right? He denies it, he reframes it, he weasels out of it because his ego is just in overdrive. Right, so I think for a lot of gammas listening to this, taking on that kind of powerful ego too soon is just going to lead to backslides, right? You'll get a little bit of reality, you'll reframe it, you'll deny it, and you'll give up game, and you'll go on sluthate.com, right? So I think it's probably strategically wise for gamma to delay the battle with his ego. So how do you do that? Well, I'd say what you do is, of course, you've got to deal with reality, so go to the gym, right? Go to the gym and lift the weights. Watch your diet. You know, figure out what your fashion's going to be. Start changing your aesthetic. Go out and do cold approach. You know, go and do your day game. You know, be a theory junkie if necessary, but so long as you're doing the core important things, which is doing cold approach to try to fuck girls and working on your SMV by things like reading a load of books, by going to the gym, by watching your diet, by sorting out your fashion, so long as you're doing the real things. Now, you will have limited success because girls will sense that you're a gamma twat, but you know, some of them are just going to like you, and some of them aren't going to quite realise how much of a twat you are until later, after you've already fucked them and got the reference experience. So what you can do, and this is basically what I did, is I was a gamma twat for quite a while, but I was going out and doing my cold approach. I was working on my fashion, I was working on my game. So even though I had this kind of lingering gamma twatness, you know, like a little bit of a chip on my shoulder, a little bit of a monkey on my back, and that this was making a lot of guys think, hang on, that Nicky's a bit of a wanker, I was still, every now and then, I was getting a pretty girl. And even if I wasn't fucking the pretty girls, I was getting a lot of girls to give numbers. I was getting a lot of girls on dates, because you know, it might take them a while to figure out that you're a gamma twat, but by the time they figure that out, say on the second date, and they decide not to fuck you, you've already had the street stop, you've already had the number, you've already had 2 dates, so you've already managed to bank quite a lot of reference experiences, like positive, and you've already managed to bank quite a lot of time in field working on your game. So I think it'd be roughly analogous to those of you who've played real-time strategy games like Command and Conquer. There's a kind of general exploit that's popular in a lot of the old real-time strategy games, which is this. You have like 2 armies, 2 enemy bases at the opposite side of the map, like you and another player, or you and the computer artificial intelligence, and instead of, say, building a little bit of an army, going out, pushing your front line a bit more favourably, having a bit of a skirmish and so on, what often happens in these games is both guys literally just collect resources and build tanks. Right? They go up the tech tree, they build tanks, and for like 2 hours there's no actual combat. It's a little bit like in World War One, when England and Germany were building dreadnoughts but never letting them leave the harbour. You know, so they had these massive armies, massive navies of like these killer ships, but they only actually met once at Jutland by accident. And what both happened is they both basically fired off a few shells at each other and then ran away, right? Because the fear of failure was too high. Now, so in a sense, what you're doing, if you think of like the other player, that is the ego, right? That's who you're eventually going to fight. Right? You don't want to fight it right now. What you want to do is you want to do your resource collection, you want to build up your tech tree, you want to get a massive army of tanks, and then finally, when you're at a position of strength where you might actually win, then you take on the ego. Then you like do your tank rush across the map. So I think that's probably a good idea for gammas with their also precious egos, is do your day game, read your blogs, read your material, work on all these little fine-tuning things, go to the gym, work on your fashion, build up your reference experiences, and then every now and then, when you feel like you can handle it, take on your ego a bit. And you will ultimately have to take on your ego if you want to break through to a level of decent success and you want to break out of Gamma and become Sigma. But it is nice where if you do it and then you get your massive meltdown and your long dark nights of the soul, at least you have certain objective facts and certain reference experiences that you can use as a crutch to get yourself through the meltdown, prevent the delusion bubble completely reforming, and then set yourself back on the track. So there you go. That's my guideline for Gamma to Sigma.